Okay, I think we're about ready to start. So, first of all, welcome all of you here for this evening's lecture by Filip Dujardin, Impossible Reality. So Filip is a Belgian photographer, and I would say an image maker is also another way of describing him. He studied architecture, first of all, at the University of Ghent, and then later studied photography at the Royal Academy, also in Ghent. Since the mid-2000s, sort of 2007, he was just saying he's been making a series of images that deal with notions of the way in which architecture and the construction of re-realized reality, a kind of fabricated reality, can be made, the resonances they have. So this work deals with the ways in which fragments of reality can be recorded and reimagined in a series of impossible collages, which are then returned to the three-dimensional sort of world through their fabrication in reality. So it's kind of very evocative reconceptualization and refragmentation of the way in which architecture exists as a kind of image system, perhaps I would say. So his practice in that regard works with architectural photography, the visual arts, and as I was saying, right through to what it is to fabricate both the image and then following the image, the object itself. So these images, as we'll see, are marked with various elements such as humor, absurdity, notions of construction, and most of all, I think, ideas of beauty and intelligence. Following on from this work, he was also one of the co-curators of the Belgian exhibition at the Venice Architecture Biennale in Venice.
First of all, thank you for inviting me here in London, and thank you for the introduction. Maybe a tiny correction, I'm not an architect, I didn't study architecture, so people often think I'm an architect, but I'm not, and I think I don't want to be an architect. I don't know why, but something says that I don't want to be an architect. So tonight I will give you an overview of my activities, starting with architectural photography, and people ask me sometimes, why do you still photograph actual buildings? Okay, sorry. Okay, that's another title. So people ask me sometimes, because you probably know me from my digital photo collages, but I'm still an architectural photographer, and I still do it because I still like it. I still like to wander around in buildings with the camera and frame it, smell it, hear the acoustics of a building. And of course, my artistic work is evolved completely out of my practice as an architectural photography. So these two works are really linked together in a very strong way. So I still make photos for architects. So I want to show you a series of images of merely Belgian projects, because there's a lot of interesting things going on now in Belgium, or at least in Flanders, the Flemish part of Belgium. There's a very interesting young generation making quite interesting buildings. So I have the honor to shoot or to work for most of them. So I have the privilege to shoot all these images, and for me, it's also interesting to keep in touch how architects think about space and how they find solutions for a certain program, and that's for me very interesting as an inspiration to use in my own work, in my collages. But you will see later that I make also installations, spatial three-dimensional installations, and even in a later stadium I photograph my own work. So that's maybe explaining the title Pixel, Brick, Pixel. It all started with pixels, and the pixel became a brick, and then I shoot my own installation, so it's becoming a pixel again, but you will see later. So now I will show you some images of existing buildings, and maybe I want to show it, and I want to give my own definition of what, in my opinion, is architectural photography about, because there are certain mechanisms present in architectural photography that are, for me, really interesting, and that and says something about the status of an image in the architectural world. So maybe I want to read it from my sheet, because I want to choose my words very carefully. So what, in my opinion, architectural photography is about showing, of course, but also about not showing, and it's about compression and elimination. So I think a picture can be very clear, but at the same time, it can suggest something that is maybe not there. And I think, of course, by doing that, you idealize or you sublimate the subject or the object. So I think, in my opinion, a good architectural photograph is dealing about unveiling the universal qualities of architecture that transcends the particular of the photographed project. And by doing that, you place the building in a kind of 12,000 years history of architecture. And of course, by photographing constructions, these images are used. They are by architects. They are published widely. So you're making the building into an icon in some ways. And in some ways, you could say that even the picture replaces the building, or the picture becomes architecture and becomes a tool in discussions all over the world and a source of inspiration for architects. So it's quite a responsibility as a photographer. Maybe, and that's my personal opinion, architectural photography is also about saying that the architect is right and that he made the right design for that particular program. And, for example, showing the context where the building is built, seeks the contrast between the so-called undesigned surrounding and the new structure that is the result of good choices made by the architect. And this contrast effect adds to the effect of a building as an ultimate alternative for a certain problem. And in certain cases, it can provide a surreal accumulation of structures, as you can see here. And that sounds maybe pretentious, but I think a good architectural photograph can also show something that cannot be observed while seeing the building in real. So maybe it can show the ineffable or what wasn't designed from the beginning. Architectural photography is also about this strange convention, and that's a perspective correction, as you can see on all images, but on this image it's very radical. And what do I mean with perspective correction? You see that you have the rectangular frame, and all the lines of the building, they run parallel with that frame, and that's quite an unnatural way of looking to architecture, because if you look with your eye to a building, all the lines go to one point. So it's a matter of technical equipment. It's a special lens you use for that. But that's a very kind of abstract interpretation of a building that has its own aesthetics, and I think it has something to do. I don't know how this way of working slipped into this architectural photography. I think it has something to do with the fact that an architectural photograph has to resemble in some way the plan of the architect, who I think in most ways also have an axonometry or where the lines run parallel, and that the photo has to resemble the initial design or the plan or the representation made by the architect. And I often feel when I make a series of images of a project and I show them to my client, because it's a commission, I often feel a sense of happiness that the picture is confirming their ambition that was in the design, that in the end everything went well and the building is executed well and it functions in its surrounding. And that's nice to feel that the photograph is a kind of confirmation of their maybe doubts they have. I don't know, not every architect have doubts, but some of them do have. Of course, I talk about the frame. The frame, it's a very dictatorial frame of the camera. You have the rectangular or sometimes a square, and you have to adapt everything to that very dictatorial, if I may use that word, to look at architecture. And you have to find a certain tension between that frame, and that's quite interesting. You can use, of course, the typologies. It's always nice to detect the typology in architecture, because the typology in an architecture, they hardly changed over 12,000 years. People or architects still are still thinking about how to construct a wall or a window or a roof, and that hardly changed for thousands of years. So it's really interesting for me to see over and over again how architects deal with these very archetypes in architecture. As you can see here, the silhouette of a very classic building, and then double it, extend it. And then you have, for example, the typology of the column. You see it everywhere. I think this is a quite interesting image. I think here you see three types of columns. You see the old one, then you see the newly built concrete columns, and then you see a third typology. I don't know the name of it's a kind of scaffold support for something that is up, and that's a sort of a column as well. So for me, it's nice that you can show that in one image, because that's for me very challenging. It's to capture or to compress, and that's the ultimate challenge, to catch the project in one image, or the essence of one project in one image. The column, another column. Two types of chimneys. Of course, buildings are built for people. They are used by people, so it's interesting to show how buildings or how people interact with buildings. Maybe that's a bold expression, maybe a good photograph of a building. Let us believe that architects are making the world a better place. I don't know. And to finish the series of images, architectural photography is also looking very concentrated at the building by moving with the camera back and forth and using almost every square inch of the horizontal and vertical plane in front of the subject. So at least that's my way of working, and to give every element in architecture its integrity and give it its place within the frame. So all these insights I'm summing up right now, I got from photographing buildings for 15 or 16 years right now. And by publishing photographs in books and magazines, I got aware what the effect is of showing architecture through the medium of a photo and how these photos are used in discussion and even emotions. And these qualities intrigued me and made me think how I could amplify or even manipulate the content of an architectural image. And of course, I'm always trying to make an exciting image, but sometimes the building is not so interesting to make an exciting image. So I was thinking, how can I make my own kind of architecture? As I said, I'm not an architect, so I can't design my own building. So I had to find a way or think how I could imagine or visualize my own kind of architecture. And of course, the best way is pretending to be an architect myself and design my own structures. And in the beginning, I experimented on photographs of existing buildings. For example, this one is one of my first. It's not a collage. It's a manipulation of an existing building in Ghent, in my hometown, and it's a typical phenomenon. I think you have it here in England as well. It's a house with a front facade. You see a slight suggestion, but the how you call it, the other facade is waiting to be for another building that has to build onto it, but it will probably never happen. But it's still waiting for a building that will never come. So it was a kind of uniform, undetailed facade. So I gave it a kind of identity by folding back a part of the building and make it a kind of to give it a kind of structural quality. Another existing building on the Belgian coast, where I did some slight manipulations, especially on the stylistic features. You have a kind of modernism, and then you have a kind of strange roof light that has a different style. And then I photographed a building block just around the corner of my house. It's a very representative for the Belgian way how cities were built. This is a row houses. If you would see the front facades of these buildings, they are very well executed. They have detailed ornamentation, and they are really showing the status of the inhabitants. But often on the backside, that is not visible to the public, you see another architectural logic going on. And there you see often illegally extensions of the original building. And what I did here, I photographed this backside of this ensemble and erased every window, or almost every window and door, in order to enhance that sculptural quality of this organically grown architecture. I was thinking about proportion, of course. Architecture has always to do with proportion, and this image is dealing without density and certain measurements. And if you look at the different parts, they're maybe not so interesting, but if you put them together, I think you get a kind of interesting tension. For me, it's also interesting to use this new technique of the digital collage, as you can call it, to make a slide or use it as a tool to make comments on architectural history or certain architectural traditions. I'm not an academic, or I don't write manifestos of how architecture should be in the future, but for me, like this image, was quite interesting and quite obvious that a lot of our architectural culture is based on the modernistic ideas of the beginning of the previous century. And especially I took the typology of the apartment block, and you see them everywhere, of course, in the outskirts, also in Belgium. And I photographed one typical building block in my hometown again, in Ghent. that was built with this typical modernistic credo of uniformity and stacking the same modules in one building block. And often the inhabitants aren't allowed even to choose the color of their curtains. So in order to preserve the uniformity of that block, as if they mean that uniformity is good. So I had the idea, if the inhabitants would have the chance to adapt their little outside space of their balcony to their own taste and to their own ideas, how they want to build or to put their own identity in their outside space, you could end up with a block like this, with a new architectural logic in it. And this series of images I'm going to show now was made way before the other image of the building block, but is in fact dealing about the same themes. This is a series of black and white pictures I took from a social housing block in Ghent just before demolition. And on the left upper corner you see the original chimney that was present in every apartment, and throughout the years you see that every inhabitant adapted the chimney to their own tastes and put their own individuality into that chimney. So I made a kind of very sec images of these typologies and all the adaptations of that same typology. And here you see the backside of that same building block that has no balconies, that has an even tighter grid of windows. And here I did a similar idea, but with one difference, that the renovation or the customizing of every building apartment unit was done in a uniform material. So that's, for me, interesting, or maybe the clue of this image, that is a kind of uniformal collective adaptation of a building. It's like a parasite that invades the building. I think the same is going on here. A very square cubus building where I had the idea, if every inhabitant could bring his own window, it would end up with something like this. And I think it's in current architectural debate, especially if you go to you went to the Architecture Biennale in Venice, and you see the work of the head curator Aravena. He's also thinking about how you can produce architecture where the share of the future inhabitant can be more present. And he made some social housing blocks where you only built half of the house and the other part could be built by the inhabitant. The next series of images, of course, as a photographer, and I think you as an architect, I'm also intrigued, of course, by a building as a volume in space, with all its sculptural aspects and expressiveness. So I made a series of images where I exploited the mechanisms in designing buildings. And one technique is, of course, the cantilever, or how you deal with gravity. And that's a series of images. Sometimes, I think, Mark, you call them impossible. And often people think they are impossible, but I'm not so sure if they are impossible. I think they are still plausible, and that's really very important for me, that they are still in the range of plausibility. Yeah? I'm not making science fiction, because science fiction, that's something else. That's another dimension I don't want to work in. It has to, and that's maybe the attractiveness of these images, that they have still a dream, that they can become real. and I'm not an engineer, but even provide some structural solutions to keep everything right, how naive it may seem. You also see that all these buildings have a certain patina, they have a certain kind of historic expression, like they are, I sometimes call it kind of ancient monuments from the future. You see the concrete is not very clean, they have a kind of historic patina. That's for me very important because I want to make a real difference between the current way of renders that often architects show when they, or produce when they present their projects. The typical render, like, I don't like it very much because maybe they are too perfect. So that's why these buildings have a kind of low-tech skin. They are high-tech, but they are elaborated in a low-tech way. And this tension is for me quite important. Maybe an image of how I make or how I construct these images. In the beginning, I made models with the Lego blocks of my children, and then I photographed it, and I imported it into Photoshop and use it as a kind of model where I stick and copy and paste fragments of pictures of real existing buildings. So what I do, I make a design, then I go out with my camera and I shoot all the facades that I want to stick onto the model. So on my computer I have a whole library of folders with all kinds of materials, brick, wood, roofs, where I can that I can use to realize these collages. And of course, from the beginning, I wanted that they look very real and very plausible. And of course, if you look twice, you will notice that they are not perfect, and there are some things giving it away that they are not real. But at first glance, and that's for me very important, there's a total confusion by the public. It's a quite intense process to make these things as realistic as possible. Another Lego block model that became this image. This was made with SketchUp. Now I discovered SketchUp because you can't make it in Lego, I think. I'm sometimes call it my low-tech Frank Gehry. Again, an older series of images I made of, how you call it, generic architecture on Flanders fields, which I think is very interesting because they were made by non-architects, just by farmers or city people who have a horse on the countryside and they have to build a shed to protect their material or the animal. And they just use leftover materials and construct this, in my opinion, very beautiful, very authentic and very essential buildings that sometimes resemble even to current modern architecture, like the two above, quite abstract. And this gave me the idea to make this image. It's dealing with the same mechanism, but with that difference that I make kind of contrast between the planned design of the building. Obviously, these three towers were well proportioned, but if you see how the facades are made, they are quite wild and not so planned. So this tension between the planned and the improvisational is for me quite interesting. And apparently, Rem Koolhaas also noticed this image for a project in England, in Manchester. Someone sent me this article written by a journalist who apparently detected that one part of the building, it's a kind of cultural center with a concert hall and exhibition rooms. And you see at the back part of that building, there are obviously similarities between my picture and what OMA did. Strange. I wonder if it. I think he won. I think he won the competition. So I guess it will be built. Keep me updated. Another image dealing with the same idea of this this wild architecture, but on a bigger scale. Again, that tension between two strategies in architecture. Of course, typologies, it's also very important in architecture, as I said before. The roof without a house under it, windows, inside, outside. Am I inside or am I outside? Of course, natural artifacts are for me also very interesting to show, because a building is always constructed in a certain surrounding, if not nature. So I made a few images who are dealing with that, and you can wonder what was first, the rock or the buildings, and how architecture in some way colonizes our world. And that's a panoramic picture of San Francisco, or at least the skyline of San Francisco. And here I had the idea to reconstruct the original topography of that city that was originally built on hills, very steep hills, but you can't perceive it not so clear anymore because of the building. So I re-implemented the original landscape. So I photographed other green hills around the city. Sorry. And just put them into the skyline. So you have a combination of two moments in history of the city compressed into one image. Of course, for me, it was very interesting if I could use this way of working in other contexts or in other cultural places. So I was invited at a certain time by cities in Europe, for example, excuse me, by the city of Deauville. It's a very posh bourgeoisie city or village on the Normandy coast in France. And they asked me to make a series of images dealing with the very typical architectural history or heritage of that city, with its typical big villas, with the typical use of the graphic use of timber. I don't know the English word, how you call it, this wooden graphics. It has a certain name, I forgot. So I photographed all these very bling-bling villas of the 19th century and recomposed them in kind of bigger structures. Again, photography or image making as a tool to enhance the reality. And maybe you could say these images are maybe hyper-real, because the different aspects of the reality of that certain place are compressed into one image. But of course, Deauville has its very glamorous side, but if you go a bit further land inwards, you also see these kind of less glamorous buildings, this more popular structures, and I think it was interesting to combine these two types of buildings with their own different social status. That's the beginning of a city, you could say. That's maybe one of my most romantic images I ever made. Next. Of course, Deauville is situated on the Normandy coast, so for me the beach is for me a very pristine potential building site, so I made this structure on the beach. A very typical, almost castle-like building, a bit overgrown by the sand. That's Belgian sand, that's not French. Then I was invited by a Portuguese city, the city of Guimarães, 50 kilometers away from Porto, and they asked me with the same intention to make a series of images dealing with, again, the very typical way of making architecture in that region, combined with the economic reality of that region that was suffering very hard of the economic crisis. So I made a series of 8 images dealing with the architectural tradition over there. And later you will see that I made some kind of critiques or comments on the social and economic status of that region. So here, that's the skyline again of this city, but a bit more compressed. I made several images from the town and compressed them into one hyper-dense cityscape, again by erasing all the windows in order so that these volumes become more sculptures than actual functional buildings. And in the midst of that town, there's a very world-famous castle, or at least for the Portuguese, it's a very symbolic castle. It is there where Portugal was founded. It was the birth of a nation, so it's a very political building. It's not that old. It's a 19th century reconstruction in order to serve as that political ambition of Portugal. So for me, that was very interesting to make a provocative image, because this is the ultimate postcard image of that castle. That is in essence a very political instrument for the state of Portugal, but I did a very bad restoration on it. And for the people over there, it was quite, for some people at least, offensive. And what I did, I was talking about the economic reality of that region. It is you see around that very lovely UNESCO World Heritage town of very clean town of Guimarães. You see in every village there used to be a very intense textile industry that and a lot of these factories were abandoned and became ruins. So I photographed all these ruins and made a kind of castle out of it. So the castle became a factory and the factory became a castle, you could say. Again, condensing the relics of that lost industry into a new structure. Like every town or so-called historic town, a lot of buildings were reconstructed or were invented in very recent times in order to preserve that romantic or medieval character of that city. For example, in Belgium, Bruges is a very nice example. It's almost a 19th century invention of a medieval city. Also in that city of Guimarães, there was a kind of so-called medieval palace, but it was built in the 19th century by a German architect. So what I did, I photographed the 4 sides of that building and put them together as a set piece, very artificially. Again, trying to grasp this typical architectural tradition, and they use a natural stone in a very typical way, in a very wild way, and they paint the joints between the stones. So I made a kind of inventory of these different types of walls, and again condensed them into one typical building block of that region. A transgenic landscape. Where is nature taking over, or is the city taking over from nature? Or where is the line where the natural surrounding glides into a city? And this is maybe the most political or most image that gives a critique on a certain situation. This viaduct or this bridge was built in the 80s in order to enhance or stimulate the economy in Portugal. So all big cities were linked with these bridges, but these are toll bridges. You have to pay to drive on these bridges. But because of the crisis, people hardly use these bridges. And the original fabric of the streets under these bridges are used again very intensively. So I made a kind of symbolic link between the upper private space and the public space under it by building a kind of totem of generic sheds and structures, and you see a little hole in the roof with a little ladder connecting both realities. And then I was asked in the Netherlands to make again a series of images, but then I had to reflex. Yes, I want to make one image again of the city, the skyline of a typical Dutch city. It's Middelburg in the Zeeuws-Vlaanderen on an island, Walcheren. So again, I photographed 180 angle pictures of the city and compressed them into one hyperdense cityscape, and I did some modifications on the roofs, and the windows were erased again. And for me, that was a research on in how far can you make a city abstract. To that point, can you still recognize which city it is? Probably yes. But where does it glide into another aesthetic, or does it become something universal? And this typology of the roof gave me the idea to make give me the confidence to make my first installation, my first spatial installation, and it was a sculpture, you could say, using the typology of the roof in its different forms. And here I made an installation that had the size of a modest house in that town, a kind of scaffold structures with a spatial grid of 2 by 2 meters, where I put a certain sequence of roofs, different types of roofs, made out of metal plates with the pattern of a roof tile. So in a way, I compressed the image you saw before into a spatial construction. And this construction was really placed amidst the really picturesque city fabric. And of course, it references to a picture I made earlier. And then I discovered the brick. That's very important for me because, like the title suggested, for me the brick is the pixel of architecture, because and especially the breeze brick is for me a quite universal grain of architecture, and it has the promise to become whatever. It's the tiniest, or almost the tiniest element of architecture, and a brick can become a wall, and a wall can become a house, and a house can become a city, and so on. So this universal type of material was for me very interesting to work with, and my first project I did was in Belgium, in Hasselt, in a museum, with its typical museum layout and aesthetics, white rooms. And here I had the idea to make corrections on the existing architecture. Here you see the simulations of the project I wanted to propose to the museum. And they liked it, and they were built. So here you have a big window overlooking the city, and here I reframed the view towards the city by building a new wall just behind the glass curtain. And from the inside, it looked like this. And for me, is also interesting, and you will see later. For me, it's very interesting that I always make or when I think or design these constructions, I always have a photographic reflex that I know I will photograph, or I want to photograph my own installation, in the hope it will deliver an interesting image that will stand on itself, because often these installations are temporary, they disappear, and only the picture remains. And this construction was placed together with this image that is also dealing with the same idea of correcting architecture. Of course, they are not functional corrections. They just give a suggestion. And here you see that this little wall adapts itself to slide to small, not so important elements in the space. And on the staircase, I built a column. Again, a column, for me, very interesting typology, but a very banal, a very ordinary typology. But if you place it on a step of a staircase, it becomes something completely different, in my opinion. And especially if you climb the stairs, you have a completely other perception of that column. And that gave me the idea of a freestanding column. That's almost the same height. It's 5 meters, just stacked breeze bricks on a field. And the interesting thing was that the wind gave it an extra aspect. And so on. It was quite interesting if you were on the bottom of that structure and you saw these bricks dancing in the air. So again, a column. This gave me the idea of a very quite recent series called Memorials. And Memorials, for me, that's, I think architecture is, or a building is in a sense always a kind of memorial, because it's a product of working with the vocabulary in architecture that is already there for thousands of years, and just again really rethinking how a column should look like, what is the possibility of a column, a roof, a cantilever. So I made a kind of 3 images, and this one is Memorial 1, where I use the typology of the column that is only using bearing itself, or a roof. It's a kind of architectural folly that gives a kind of overview of all different types of columns in history. And this was presented in the Belgian Pavilion. Maybe I have to say something about that. I was co-curator, I was not the main curator, and we have made an exhibition about scarcity in architecture. If there's scarcity, not only by means, but also with spatial limitations, can you still produce interesting or even beautiful architecture? Because we even used the word beautiful or beauty connected to scarcity. So we presented 13 projects in the pavilion, and one of them was a project where you can see a picture on the right, where an architect used the, how you call it, the plasterboard, the gyprock panels, as an architectural element in the renovation of a very classic house in Antwerp. And what he did here, that in the entrance hall, so this old house was renovated into apartments, and every apartment have its tubes, its technical tubes, and all these tubes came together at that point in the entrance hall, and instead of hiding these tubes, he made a kind of new typology of a column. So made by this plasterboard, and this color, this pink color, is the original color of this plasterboard. It's the fireproof, or no, it's not. It's a fireproof type of these, and that's the color, the color of fireproof plasterboard. And throughout that building, he made different adaptations of the architecture in green cardboard, acoustic cardboard, and they all have their own color. So we remade that column on a 1-to-1 scale, and you can't see the picture. Yeah, and that picture was also there, and then my artistic interpretation of that theme. Another memorial, Memorial 2, is also a photomontage, and again, I think an image, a building is always a memorial. Of course, here you can read the history of that building very clearly. You see the original structure of that palace-like building, and you see all the adaptations throughout the years. And this gives a kind of accumulation of certain moments in that history of that building. Again, the compression of certain times into one image. The next installation I did was in and around a historic castle in Flanders. A very romantic medieval castle, almost falling apart, in a very bad condition, but it's, of course, it's heritage. They don't have the money to restore it. And I had an idea, if I, that's a movie, if I use the buttress, these column-like structures that are usually built to keep walls straight, or to prevent them from falling apart. I use that typology to make 2 columns, 2 buttresses, one standing next to the castle but not touching the castle, and one was floating in the pond. And it was nice to see how these structures in brick were put in place. So you see here the one standing and the one floating, and it was, in the end, it was something like that. And the sculpture was called Equilibrium, and of course these typologies were invented to keep buildings straight, but in this installation they had to keep themselves in balance. A next installation, again in these bricks, I mean, was built in Kortrijk, a provincial town, again in Flanders, near a river. And here I had the idea of pulling the city towards the water, because it's a very important river, but the city center of that city was really a bit further, or turned its back towards the water. So I had an idea to make an installation that makes a kind of symbolic gesture by building, in essence, a wall of about 40 meters in length. And this wall was again kept straight by buttresses, but the buttresses were the very common typologies in architecture again. And you see a wall, and you see chimney, an arch, and a roof. And these were placed in a certain sequence, so you have the kind of suggestion of an open folded house, or even the typical ribbon buildings in Belgium. And the structure was placed parallel with the river. And everything was a little bit downsized to four-fifths of a normal proportion of a house. So there was something strange if you felt that it was a bit underdimensioned. And it works, apparently. It attracts people. The idea of using a sculpture as a way of compressing ideas was done in this next installation I did in a typical white box gallery. And in Antwerp, and before I made this structure, I went to the building market and I bought 1 square meter of the most common building materials, like the breeze blocks and the cellular blocks and the concrete blocks. And I assembled them in a wall of about 6 meters. Here I made the layout of the pattern of the wall, and masons, they built it for me. And in the end, I made a wall that gave another tension to the space, but was also an expression, or even a compression of, or a metaphor of the city with its theme and its variations, and that a city is a compression of different ideas. Often with a general plan, but in detail you see big differences. So this was a kind of metaphor. it was funny to see when I was this summer in Greece, on a Greek island, I noticed, or I stumbled upon this interesting building where one generation used material of a former generation of builders and made a new construction. The next installation, a bit more abstract one, is really about dealing about the essence of architecture, and that's dividing the inner and outer space by making walls. That's, in my opinion, the essence of architecture. So what I did here, it's quite a classic museum space, and here I used the square grid of the ceiling, and I used it as a basis for a room that has the same dimensions. And here you see on the foreground, you see the original contour of that room, but as you see, that room fell apart in different elements and was spread out all over the space. And for me, it was quite important how can you reproduce or reconstruct that original space with one window and one door in your mind through walking through these deconstructed elements. Memorial 3 is, in essence, dealing with the same concept of a typical city ensemble in my hometown, where I did some abstract interventions in it. Complete nonsensical, but it's also architectural. And this is, in my thinking, the essence of architecture. That is, like I said before, architecture is dealing on how can we design a fold between the public and the private. And here in this very modernistic white box house, the man asked me to make an artistic intervention. And on the left you see the simulation, and on the right you see the actual construction. And what I did here was I built a wall around one chair. It's a very known, it's a classic chair by Maarten van Severen, maybe you know him, designed by Vitra. Also the table, and the work was called The Guest. So it was interesting for me how using this really very ordinary typology of a wall, and how you can manipulate a certain space completely just by building a box around it. This little space becomes something completely different, and it has a kind of even a psychological tension, I think. Also, the mortar in the joints was different inside and outside. And one of the final projects is a recent awareness. Maybe you also have that awareness that, however, how beautiful architecture is designed, it is also always a bit clumsy, I think. Architecture can be clumsy. It has a sense of an obstacle. You have to climb a staircase, you have to open a door, sometimes you have to fold yourself in a certain position to enter a space, or the space is too low. So I think architecture, how beautiful it is, it always has a sense of clumsiness and a sense of impracticability or something like this. So in the same gallery, I made two interventions in the back office, and this is the toilet where I I built a wall between the frame of the door and the door itself. You still could enter the room, but you had to fold yourself in a certain position. And for me, I only showed the picture in the gallery. So for me, it was very interesting. I really conceived that as a photographic installation, because if you visit the exhibition, you don't see this actual installation, unless you have to go to the toilet, of course. But you only saw this image framed on the wall. And a second intervention I did was in the cellar, and there was a staircase, and there I did a slide. I did a kind of correction and made a second staircase that runs into the wall. Again, only this picture was shown in the exhibition. And in the same exhibition, I showed this marble breeze block in order to celebrate my fascination for the brick as a new pixel. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. So we will, there's some room for questions. So I will just, there's room for questions. So all we ask, obviously, always is to speak into the microphone for the record.
It's just what you think of, like, your collaborations with architects, and I know you've collaborated with especially young David Vinctelio, and I think it's like fascinating to me how their built work, the image of their built work is looking like your digital collages, and some of your digital collages are looking like their built work. I'm just wondering sort of the kind of influences you guys had each other. The way
I have a very specific relationship. It's one of the most special relationships I have with architects. I work for different architects, but with that office, I have a very intense collaboration in that sense that we look at each other's work. And especially they use my photography when I photograph one of their projects. And actually I photograph all their projects. They use these pictures as a tool in their design process, and that's very interesting to see. I know not all architects do that, but sometimes I have to photograph a project under construction. When it's not finished, you only see the concrete skeleton or something like that. And then they look at the picture and they look with a new eye to that project, and they may change their initial design in something else by using that picture. Not only my picture, they also go to the site themselves, but of course, but this picture is really used as a tool in their designing process, and that's very interesting to see. And of course, I'm influenced by their way of working. I think you are familiar how they look at architecture and how they use materials. So, and of course, there's a kind of influence of their way of working in my collages, maybe a bit less, but certainly in my installation. That's true. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting collaboration. Yes.
I have another question. So I saw the video of the brick column, and I thought it was such an interesting sort of transition between sort of the image and the installation, and now you have the moving images. But the images you produce are digital collages, right? Do you think this like hypothetical question, like, do you think your next step might be a hyper-realistically rendered animation?
Maybe, or filming, yeah. These two films are not artworks. It's just documenting what I did. But that's, yes, I'm thinking about filming, but I don't have very specific ideas. But that could be a next step, of course. Now I'm thinking about photographing my own work, but not showing the actual work. That for me also, that there's a kind of disconnection between the reality and the picture of it. That's for me quite interesting. Or maybe the same realities are at the same place, but you can't perceive them at the same moment. So for me, that's quite interesting, this connection of reality and the image of it. So that's what I'm exploring right now. But of course, filming would be a very logical step, next step, yeah, of course.
The reality, or
Can you repeat? Yeah. Can you just repeat, because you're...
why you moved from the pictures to the sculpture?
Why?
Why?
Well,
Because,
first, yeah.
you know, the picture are real, like picture, and the reality is unreal, like reality. Because it's not a real reality, no? It's like...
Well, at least they are more abstract, because, as I'm saying, I don't want to make real architecture in my installations, because I'm not an architect. I don't want to make real architectures. So in that sense, I work with the architectural vocabulary, but my grammatics are different. So I like to work with things that are very recognizable, what I do in my collages as well, but just shift them or make another combination. That's what I do in both projects, I think, in my collages, in a very detailed way, in a very recognizable, realistic way. Of course, if you make installations, it makes no sense to reproduce my collages in real, then you're making buildings. I think that's too ambitious in the first place, but I think you have to think differently and try to translate the things that are going on in my collages, try to reproduce it in spatial constructions, or at least that you have the same way of or sense of confusion. I don't know if I succeed every time, but that's at least my initial purpose, yes.
You are near to be an architect.
Maybe I'm an architect after all, but I don't want to be an architect. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wondering where that impulse to correct is coming from. I mean, it's clearly not kind of authoritarian. I don't think it's obsessive compulsive. So could you say, or perhaps it is, but could you say a bit more about, in a sense, why you use that term or what that impulse is?
It's especially my recent installations, I used the word corrections, I think, because of course, a building was designed by an architect at a certain time for a certain program, and I'm always wondering, is this the final ultimate solution for a problem or a program? I don't think so, I'm pretty sure. So I think a program can be designed in different ways. Of course, every architect has his own ideas or his own spatial notions. So for me, that's interesting as an artist. Can I do an artistic intervention that is dealing with this so-called arbitrary construction of or idea of a building that was conceived by an architect at a certain time? I think you can feel this in this actual building every day, that you have to adapt yourself these were former houses, and now it's becoming a school, so you have to really fold yourself in two, as a matter of speaking, in order to adapt yourself to this building. So for me, that's interesting as an artist, to think about the status of a building now, and can I make corrections on that? Not in a functional way, of course, in an artistic way, but just giving a first idea of an alternative. Yeah.
I mean, there's fascinating crossovers. What seems to me within the work is, there's a kind of fluidity of the way in which some of those images map over on one another. And I'm just wondering, there's this, at certain points there's a deliberateness to it.
Can you repeat the last?
At certain points there's a deliberateness to it. So say, for example, in the last image you have here, where you've manufactured
This one, you mean? Yeah.
this one, yeah, with the actual,
Yeah.
you've manufactured the brick through the translation into another material. Then there's other moments where they seem, you know, more surreal in terms of the fact that they're less conscious as gestures. So I'm just wondering, within your kind of methodology, in particular, within the photo collages, at what point do you know to stop? Because it seems they're very beautiful in terms of their realization. So obviously there's a way in which you know at which point to stop that process in making an image that's fixed, say.
Well, I think there's also always in all my work a kind of transgression of meaning. You work with elements you know, and they become something else just by doing a manipulation. I think that's what you mean. And of course, in my collage, it's very obvious. But I think this brick is dealing about the same thing. I think it's just using a very common typology in architecture, what I do in my collages as well, but just giving it a very unconventional materialization. I think there's it's not a brick anymore, it becomes something else. And that's what is throughout my work, this very, I call it sometimes the very ordinary aspect that architecture always have. It's not art. It can be, it can have artistic aspects, but it's not art in my opinion. So for me, the essence of producing that work is trying to slide it into working with the elements we know, but that's a very common technique in arts, of course, and slide it in something with another content. Yeah, that's, I think, present and throughout the whole body of my work, I think. Yeah. I don't know if that's clear.
Well, no, I think, I mean, it's very resonant and it's very beautiful and it's kind of architectural logic.
Yeah.
I think is the thing. So it's interesting that you would say, I mean, within those methodologies, they're very much ones that within the notions of architectural design, we often work with, but don't work with such kind of fluidity or flexibility as you do within your
That's
practice.
why I don't want to be an architect, I think, or at least, no, but that's true. No, I have a lot of respect for architects, of course. But I think that's a key of my practice, that I'm looking at architecture, but I'm not working in the field of architecture, because I don't know how to design a house, really, I'm honest. A practical, functional house, I don't know how to do it. Or even a bigger building. I really admire how architects can design very complex programs. I can do it. I really can't do it. So that's my escape to make this work.
Definitely. So thank you again for coming in.
Yeah.
And there are
It's a pleasure.
copies of your book available here.
Ah, yeah, okay.
I should
Absolutely.
mention, but thank you again.
Thank you.